secure, clean, reliable energy for Europe while having to stay competitive at the same time. No small things today in our discussion. I'm very happy that I'm joined by Markus Rauramo, the President and the Chief Executive Officer of Fortum, as well as the President of Eurelectric, as well as Christian Ruby, who is the Secretary General of Eurelectric. I want to give you a little bit of context to our discussion today. There have been several discussions already in this Europe Forum on energy for fairly obvious reasons. Europe is currently slowly getting back on its feet following a historic energy crisis that we went through a few years ago. But at the same time, our response to this crisis was historic as well, given how quickly and how quickly we reacted, as well as how determined we were in our response. We diversified away from Russian gas, notably, as well as other fossils. We ramped up renewables in Europe. Their share continued to grow. And we have returned the discussion on nuclear energy back to European level. At the same time, high energy prices in Europe are hindering our competitiveness and slowing it down. Extreme weather events that we all witnessed this summer are a stark reminder of climate change and the need to ramp up and speed up clean transition. Yet many politicians and businesses would prefer to pull a brake on climate action in the name of competitiveness. We are also finding ourselves in a highly challenging geopolitical context, to say the least. Energy is a critical good, and it is very central in almost any trade negotiation or any diplomatic or political discussion between countries or partners. And it does not help matters that EU is heavily dependent on imported fossil fuels. So today's discussion focuses on energy sector's role in Europe's competitiveness, and we will also discuss electrification as a solution for decarbonizing Europe. Competitiveness, it is something that not a single European politician is giving a speech without mentioning that. It tops the agenda everywhere. There was a Mario Draghi report. We have a competitiveness compass that the Commission proposed early this year. At the same time, with the competitiveness debate, there is a debate on climate. And I would like to ask you to open this competitiveness part of our discussion, that how do we marry these two parallel universes, almost sometimes it feels, climate debate and competitiveness debate, so that they can mutually reinforce the debate as well as our solutions to these respective matters. Markus, do you want to start?
Happy to start, and thanks for inviting myself and Christian here. So maybe first, I acknowledge the issue. So the background is that Europe is using, when it comes to energy, Europe uses twice as much gas as it uses electricity. And in a Finnish and Nordic context, this is not always so easy to understand and remember. So there's a massive shift that needs to happen. And this will include not only the technical and financial part, but it's also a big social transition for industries and for households who will need to move from fossil gas into clean energies, whether it's synthetic gas or electricity. Then the other question in the big context is that, well, is there hope? Is there even a theoretical possibility that this could be done? And that's where Nordics come into play as an example that clean, reliable, affordable energy is possible. And the point there is that in Nordics, things are the other way around. We are using much more electricity than gas. But this did not happen by itself, and this did not somehow fall from the skies on us, and we got the CO2-free system. But what we have today is a result of decades of very clear policies on accepting all CO2-free power. Hydropower, nuclear power, also being positive to renewables, but also being able to go through the transition. We've had a big share of coal, we've had a big share of fossil fuels in the mix. That goes for my company, Fortum, as well. So if you go 10 years back, we had gigawatts of fossil-fired capacities, even in the Nordics. But that all has been phased out. So now we are 99% fossil-free, CO2-free company. What we also have in the Nordics, what then helps in this transition, are things like smart meters, which probably we not notice too much. Everybody has one at the homes, which means that then you can measure your consumption on an hourly basis, soon on a 15-minute basis. You can have spot contracts, so if you flex your own consumption, then it will be rewarded when energy costs are lower. There is also land, and there is grid, and the prospect of new power, which is available. But even that doesn't come automatically, so it means that zoning, permitting, long-term planning has to support this. But my point with the Nordics is that, yes, the transition is possible, and it doesn't have to be expensive. It can actually be an enhancer of competitiveness.
Christian, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think Markus nailed it here at the end, that indeed there's a tendency to see this debate as a dichotomy between climate concerns, competitiveness concerns. What we're trying to say as a sector is that there is actually a way forward where we find a sweet spot and we can pursue both objectives at the same time. And that is if we center our growth strategy around electrification, building out and decarbonizing our electricity system while gradually replacing fossil fuels in end-use sectors with clean electricity. And I think this message is actually very important right now, because we are seeing not only the concerns of individual industries, but also a very ideological push, especially from the Trump administration, to rebut and roll back efforts at electrification. There's the example of the postal services in the US that were not only asked to stop deploying electric cars, but also to rip out the infrastructure they'd already deployed. So this is non-economic. It is really ideologically driven, let's say, a fight more against electrification. We also see it, by the way, in the context of this trade deal with the EU. But right now, what we need to do as Europe is to double down on our climate targets, double down on a simplification strategy that allows us to pursue clean, competitive electrification.
So you support the European, the EU model or the policy to decarbonize and to stick to our goals and to keep them and pursue ambitious climate and energy policy. But how do you see it? You mentioned the Trump administration rolling back electricity production. They are also not particularly friendly towards renewables more generally. But what could this result in a backlash in Europe as well? You both have your best place to give your commentary on this, given that you are leading Eurelectric at the moment and you are in touch with oil producers. How do you see this? Is there a danger of this type of, given that there have been quite a few politicians in Europe already saying that we need to roll back on and we need to backtrack a little bit on our ambition, and it's harmful for the industry, all these kind of things. And then the US goes and does something like this. They can do it better than the EU. We have 27 member states. We need to listen to everybody. They have one central government. They can do it faster. How do you see that?
So there is a backlash also at EU level. We see a rise of the right that traditionally, so the extreme right, I would say, that traditionally carries a deep climate skepticism. And we are also seeing individual industries push back and question the direction. What we have to say as an electricity industry is that there's also, let's say, economic interest at stake on our side. Let's take the ongoing debate about electrification of transport transport. There are very clear, quite ambitious targets in place. The electricity industry has been investing on the back of that political signal, investing in charging infrastructure, investing in all kinds of ancillary activities, investing in the grids to make sure that they are ready for the rollout of electromobility. Should we now go back and say, well, let's forget about all that, let's go back to fossil cars? Well, of course, those investments are lost and our planning horizon collapses. So it's very important to say that once we have policies in place, let's stick to them, let's find solutions and possibly flexibilities, but let's not revert to a rolling back of what we have now painfully negotiated over 5 years.
Markus?
This is a super important point. So if I think about what are the big questions that we're trying to answer here, is how to fight climate change. That is an existential problem for all of us. So how to tackle that? Europe has, on the other hand, has now been struggling, like you said in your opening words, we have been struggling with the dependency on imported fuels. And maybe that's something also we want to address so that we are not dependent on one or two sources. Like I said already, that I think the transition is very much possible. We have the tools to do that. EU has the competencies, EU has the institutions and financing structures. But like any change, you need to explain that.
Yeah.
It is really important that we as companies, as associations, politics, regulation, we explain to everybody that where are we moving from and where are we moving to, and how does that change look like? And of course, for example, with renewables, that means that we need to build grids. We need to build transmission grids, distribution grids. There will be zoning. There will be visual impact with wind turbines, and this needs to be explained. That when we get this, what do we actually then remove? What are the negative externalities that we can get rid of with this movement? And it will not be easy. That's why it's really important to have everybody on this ride, so that we don't exactly get the backlash that both of you were describing.
Yeah. Going back to the competitiveness side of this, you have also followed the European Commission presented its proposal for the multi-annual financial framework, meaning the long-term budget for the EU last month. And from the point of view of Eurelectric, for example, how do you see the role of the European Union or international European regulator as something that would drive down prices? Because we cannot have a discussion about energy without discussing high energy prices, and this also tends to be the stumbling block or the bottleneck for competitiveness, especially if we listen to business representatives. But how do you see the role of there is money for energy sector, quite a bit actually, that was proposed, but is that how much do you see the role of a regulator in this? How far can regulator go in terms of impacting prices?
Yeah, so with regards to the competitiveness of new clean energy supply, it's pretty easy to calculate that what would the cost of hybrid full load power, for example, be, and that would be competitive versus the fossil alternative today, minus the negative externalities that you would have with the fossil alternative. But again, it requires the change. So you have to commit to the change journey of having renewables, having more intermittent power, committing to flexibility, finding new ways for that. But that is possible. Then what can EU, what can the authorities and regulators do to support this journey? We have the competencies, we have tools, we have financing mechanisms, and what I would call after is the similar approach for EU as we have had, for example, in Sweden and Finland. Point being that we are then open to all CO2-free alternatives. Then it's a national question how you want to implement them and use them, but not try to address this rather big issue with one hand tied behind the back, but use the financial competencies, lending capacity from EIB, creating supply chains, getting uniform regulation, type certification for various equipment, for example, nuclear.
Yeah.
So rather than having 27 different regulations, maybe have less to get economies of scale. But there are ways.
Christian, Commission proposal on energy taxation directive, which is blissfully stuck in the Council, which means that it is stuck with member states who can't seem to be able to find a suitable solution for all of them. Do you think that's the right step? Will that be effective in terms of impacting prices?
As Eurelectric, we clearly support the swift adoption and conclusion of the negotiations on the energy taxation directive. But I think we need to be clear about where can you actually move this needle the fastest and the most, and that's at member state level. We have the example here in Finland. I understand that there's an ongoing debate about how you tax, for instance, data centers and their electricity use. And to be very clear, that's going to be much faster from member states to take those decisions and make electricity competitive. Should we also fix that directive? Sure. But if we look at, let's say, the palette of options to reduce energy prices and make electricity more competitive, this is one out of several options. Right now, when we look at what's happening in the electricity sector, we are undertaking an enormous transformation, a quite challenging, technically speaking, transformation, moving to a much more decentralized system, phasing out the old but also stable power plants. And what that means is that we have much more system cost, as we say. We are going to need to invest much more in infrastructure. We're going to need to invest much more in modern, flexible capacity, but also the stable, dispatchable capacity is the base load. And what that means is that we need to make sure that the public resources we spend in this space are aligned with these priorities. And there I think that the MFF is good news. For instance, when it comes to the quintupling of resources for energy infrastructure, the devil in the detail is now, do we spend it on the right infrastructure?
Yes, exactly.
And here I think it's important to underline that electrification first should be a principle that we pursue when it comes to infrastructure. Electrification is the most immediate strategy for the energy transition. We will need molecules and we will need carbon removals, so we will need those infrastructures, but we need to get the proportions right. We need to make sure that we make electricity and electrification a success for citizens now, for industries and citizens, when they take their car, when they try to get their heat pump shifted, or when they, as a big industrial, try to connect a battery or a new facility to the grid. That is what is the most immediate priority.
You wanted to come in, Markus?
Yeah, this is the point about the taxation, for example, energy taxation, is a really important one. If you allow, I'll take one step back to give a little bit of context to the point. So you already know that Christian is the CEO and the General Secretary of Eurelectric, and I'm the chairperson. So what is Eurelectric? What are we actually trying to do?
Exactly.
So
Thanks.
we are the association that represents all the national associations of all EU countries plus more. So 34 member countries associations, which then represent 3,500, isn't that, companies with almost 1 million employees. And what we're in Eurelectric trying to do is exactly on the points that we have been discussing today. Take in our member input, our member country input, look at what is EU, what are our customers trying to achieve, and then give good advice that if you want to get there, this is the direction you should be moving to. And I was just elected the president quite recently, and the new presidency defines the priorities that we are then working, or the Secretariat is working on. So there are 3 points. One is customer-driven electrification. So listening to our customers very carefully. That's the whole point. We want to help our customers, energy-intensive industries and consumers, to succeed. The second one, which was a little bit touched upon, is the security of supply and preparedness. so that we have a system that actually works in normal conditions and also in conditions that are not normal. And then the third point is that we already discussed renewables, connected customers, flexibility, intermittency. The third priority is that we need to digitalize and use AI in much more intensive ways than we have done before to achieve the goals. So these are the three Euroelectric priorities. But then one of these things that we continuously try to push towards EU and the regulators is that there are some really easy solutions how to make things move forward, and one of those is predictability.
Yes.
So Christian was referring to the Finnish discussion about the energy taxation for certain energy-intensive sectors. As long as that's uncertain, there is uncertainty, which impacts investment decisions. So this is kind of a, you could call us kind of staple advice that we give all the time. Keep it predictable. If you decide something, stick on to it so that you can let the markets, let the investors, let people actually work towards that goal.
And here comes the immediate question then, or the obvious follow-up to that, what you just said. How do you then see the deregulation? Well, deregulation is probably the simplification agenda of the Commission. We have presented several omnibuses, and they mainly deal with legislation related to environment, energy, climate. So how do you see that? Is there anything that could be potentially, from your point of view, something that some companies who thought that they will have the first mover benefit by already implementing everything and doing everything by the book, and then comes this? How do you see that?
It's a risk, of course, that there may be slices of under omnibus if some regulation is removed, that somebody's business model would be impacted by that. But I'm positive towards the whole omnibus concept, i.e. trying to reduce regulation. And my point there is that we have CSRD, we have taxonomy, we have Nissan, we have DORA, and we have all kinds of regulation. And having a lot of experience, for example, in sustainability reporting personally, knowing what we report, hundreds of lines, there is overlapping regulation. And when there's new regulation, like in anything in life, you ought to take stock of, okay, so is this now in line? Is this overlapping? Is this even conflicting? So removing obsolete and redundant regulation makes all the sense to me. So I just hope that Omnibus doesn't become a project of itself that lives its own life on top of everything else. But I will say also, like talking with investors, talking with many stakeholders, NGOs, ESG reporting and so on, there are things that I get continuously questions about, and there are some things we report I never get any questions about. So I would say, well, maybe that's obsolete. So we could actually get that out and stick to the ones which are very impactful and which are very topical for our stakeholders.
Christian, you mentioned earlier that electrification is key to decarbonizing Europe. I think it's very clear to everybody, at least on this stage, that Europe will not be able to meet our 2040 decarbonization targets without moving to electricity and without electrifying our system. Our grid, the European grid, is the most integrated grid in the world. And that's basically where the praise stops. There are many bottlenecks. The Commission is on it. There will be a grid package proposed by the end of this year, and we presented already an action plan 2 years ago. But what, from your point of view, what are the main bottlenecks that need to be solved ASAP?
So I think we have come a long way with a lot of different legislation, and I think it's important to underline that the reforms that have been put in place, in part, for instance, in relation to the electricity market, are important and balanced, and they should stay. So there's an element of saying, well, there's already a good job being done, and we have a lot behind us. Now, is there still stuff we can do? And yes, indeed, absolutely, there is still stuff we should be working on in the affordable energy Energy Action Plan, for instance, a number of meaningful actions were set out in relation to tariff methodologies, in relation to de-risking, as we were discussing before, in relation to bigger grid projects that may not find its own immediate financing. So there's plenty we can do on the side of the electricity sector. And then I think where we should also really focus now is on the industrial piece. So a lot has been done in the area of transport. We should try to stay the course there. Now we should turn our focus towards industry and say, what is it that's actually holding back the most obvious cases for electrification? There's a whole series of different industries in the medium temperature range where there's a business case and where there's definitely a climate upside for doing something. What is it that's holding back action here? And the decarbonization bank that's been envisaged as part of the new MFF and the Clean Industrial Deal, I think is a very good step to basically say, how can we fix the capex part of this while at the same time continuing our push to drive down electricity prices so that after the initial investment has been done, it's also a relatively cheap operation.
Yeah, Markus.
If I add a couple of points here, so I still go back to the enormous scope of the challenge. And I said before that Europe is using twice the amount of gas compared to electricity. So we have a monumental shift ahead of us. Is it technically possible? Absolutely. That can be done. But my advice would also be that let's stick to the 2040, 2050 targets, but not prescribe exactly how it should be done. Yeah. Leave it to companies, leave it to consumers, leave it to the markets to solve it. Make the solution space as big as possible. And we'll probably find solutions that we can't even dream of today that will happen already in 2030 or 2035. Couple of very concrete points on the bottlenecking and what will very likely happen is that in the short term, all the new supply will come from renewables. Yeah. That's what Fortum is doing. We have gigawatts of renewables, 8 gigawatts in permitting alone. So there will be a lot more intermittent capacity that will not be available all the time. And there's a serious point about the adequacy of the system. We saw in Iberia what happens when you don't have the required adequacy in the system. Nobody's fault exactly, but it has to be recognized that we need flexible and reactive capacities into the market, and that's where Finnish government is taking the right action with the NFS. The other point is that when we will need more grids, we will need distribution grids and transmission grids, and then we get to permitting. So if it takes 7, 10, how many ever years to actually make things happen, that will be a bottleneck. So we have to focus on things which we can impact and have to impact. Permitting and then the adequacy of the system. Yeah,
and it was something that was brought to political level 2 years ago. I'm sure that you probably, if not both of you, probably one of you were invited to a big event, a stakeholder event in Brussels to precisely discuss with what should we do with the European power grid. It is aged and it does not support renewables in the way that will be absolutely necessary going forward in the future. So that's one of the reasons why then Commission also immediately started, because I mean obviously all of this happened in the aftermath of Russia launching its war in Ukraine and the energy crisis and the prices and everything, and then the obvious question is that, well, I mean, how do we ramp up renewables if our grid system does not support it? Markus, you mentioned twice actually the amount of gas, that is natural gas, that is still being used in Europe. It is clear that the European industry will need natural gas for still some time. The Commission has been very, very transparent and open about this. in our legislation and in our communications this year. It's something that we have to mention despite our strategy to decarbonize and all the rest of it. It's very, very clear that there's a clear industry need. We are diversifying at the same time from Russian fossils, which means that some of that gas, LNG, natural gas, piped gas, has to come from somewhere else. And as was also mentioned, we are highly dependent on imported fossil fuels. But it was Trade Commissioner Šefčovič who, in his press conference on the EU-US trade deal a couple of weeks ago, he mentioned that there's a nuclear renaissance ongoing in Europe. And it is true that just going back just a couple of years, there wasn't really a nuclear energy discussion at European level at all. I mean, it was kind of, energy mixes for each member state. They decide what they do. At the moment, half of EU member states have decided to use nuclear. Some newcomers might come in or not, and then it's going to be quite big if yes. But how do you see the role of nuclear energy in the electrification of Europe going forward? How do you see that level up with homegrown renewables, for example, whose share is also growing? But could nuclear replace? And how quickly some of the imported fossils that we continue paying humongous amounts of money? Christian, do you want to start?
I think maybe to start with some simple facts, nuclear today is the single biggest source of electricity generation in the EU. I think people know in Finland that it's an important source, perhaps less so in other parts of the continent. But it's important to really underline that we need an approach which has this all hands on deck principle, as Markus has referred a few times, that we should avoid, let's say, discriminating against solutions that are actually going to be needed to achieve the target. How then do we foresee the electricity mix and how do we sort of decide on where it's going? I think here we should leave some freedom to member states, and we should also leave some significant freedoms to companies to make the right investment decisions, to weigh the risk of individual projects against others, to weigh the cost of individual projects against each other. But at the EU level, it's very important that we avoid a priori discrimination. That often happens in technical legislation, for instance, in the transformation from electricity to hydrogen, which types of electricity can you use, or in other technical dossiers. And here it's important that we get a level playing field and make sure that we can make the most of the clean resources that we have.
Did you want to come in?
Well, Christian basically emptied the bank there, but being CEO of a nuclear company,
yes,
I
you
would
might
like
have
to
a
add
couple
something.
of thoughts on that as well.
So Christian very well referred to the point that if we make the solution space bigger, it's easier to find good solutions. It's just very simple. And I go back again to the quite monumental shift that we want to make. So of course we can do it all with renewables, but that means that there will be much more land use, there will be much more grids to be built, there will be more visual impact, etc., and less stable full load power. So my advice would be that, well, let's use all the tools, find the right mix, exactly like you said, Christian, based also on national preferences and geographies and topographies and all of that. So keep the solution space as big as possible. Then what can EU do to actually make things easier, to make it more competitive? We know that in recent decades, not very much nuclear has been built in Europe. Actually, Finland, TVO, Fortum, we were the first one to commission a new nuclear reactor, Olkiluoto 3, since many, many decades. And it wasn't easy as it was a first-of-a-kind reactor. So what you want is scalability. You want supply chains where the equipment suppliers, turbines, generators, reactor vessels can make as many as possible, and then you get the cost down. And this is where EU can come to play. So both help in standardization so that the suppliers can come and establish their supply chains. The other point is that whereas we can build new solar plants in 1.5 years, we can build new wind parks from decision in 2.5 years. Nuclear takes 10 to 15 years, and the financing is much more difficult. So the point is not that that somebody externally would have to come with money, but the risk sharing is something where EU can play a role with its existing institutions like EIB and guarantee institutions and so on. So getting 10 to 15-year financing for projects, that's a difficult part to get from the bond markets or bank markets. EU can play a role there in risk sharing.
The European Commission and the EU institutions, mainly the Commission, relies a lot on diversification of energy sources as well as homegrown renewables to increase energy independence and energy security. And obviously, in this world situation, it's impossible to discuss energy without the security and independence aspects. The EU signed a trade agreement now, or a trade deal with the US this summer, and one quite central part of this is the part on energy and the political commitment that was made to purchase different types of energy, as well as it includes energy investments as well. How do you? What were your thoughts? And you can be quite honest as well. What were your thoughts when you saw that? How does that fit your immediate plans? We have to talk about immediate plans because for energy sector, 3 years is immediate. I mean, investments are for longer term. I mean, we're now talking about political commitment for the next 3 years, basically. But how do you see the energy part of the trade deal?
When I heard this announcement, the duty part itself, of course, having visibility, that reduces uncertainty. So that's per se a good thing. Duties, in my view, are not a good thing as such, but removing the uncertainty is good. Then when it comes to the commitment to buy equipment, invest, buy fuels, my thought there was that, well, typically it's done, military equipment, that's done by governments, so governments can decide that part. But on the fuel purchase side, it is companies. So I'm not yet aware what will be the mechanism, how that will be done. Can then more purchases be allocated into one or the other direction? That's something where EU needs to then work on that. How would you implement that? From our point of view, as we are not, and Eurelectric is typically representing now companies who are in electricity, of course, gas-fired capacities are a thing that also we need to understand eventually that is there an impact or not? We shall see. But many unclear points yet to be understood.
It's clear, yes. I mean, there are many things that need to be hashed out, but broadly also for the audience and those following in line, what was made was a commitment to buy different types of energy from the US worth $250 billion a year for the next 3 years. And here LNG, liquefied natural gas, plays a big role. Of course, the EU had made a commitment, again, a political commitment already before this trade deal to increase our LNG purchases because we need to have a substitute for the fossils that
I think that highlights, by the way, sorry Christian, that just highlights the point that the annual amounts you are mentioning, these are staggeringly high. Then if we are investing according to the EU targets into clean energy, we're talking about hundreds of billions and trillion plus. But then you start to see the relation that, we are spending tens of billions or hundreds of billions a year in imported raw materials and fuels. So from an independency point of view, it does make sense to invest so that we can have more home-produced clean energy.
Exactly.
Yeah, I'd maybe urge that we look at that target as something that's been agreed as part of a larger deal, and it's also been explicitly said in that agreement that this is a non-binding declaration of intent. So I would suggest that we take this seriously, but not literally, and that we think of this in the context of a trade engagement with the US, and I would advocate that we broaden broaden the scope. Again, instead of doubling down on a set of technologies that we look at the full scope of technologies we will need to invest and import liquefied gas from the US, but even more so, we'll need to find out how do we get into the future with the US together, looking into technologies that are still maturing, such as geothermal. There's a nuclear leg in this, which is fine, but what about the renewable energy technologies? Why are they excluded? How does that make sense? And maybe just to sharpen this a bit, if we were to take this literally and literally spend that money, first of all, the EU wouldn't have that money, so they would have to oblige companies to do it. We would undermine our climate targets, and we would definitely undermine our energy security because we would make ourselves extremely dependent on one supplier. So this, in my view, would go dead against the interests of the EU if we were to take this literally. So therefore, let's take it seriously, but also work on the concepts and nudge this in the direction we need to go, which is clean, competitive, and secure.
And it has to be, and again, it's important to remember that it is a political intent for 3 years. So we're not undermining our medium to long-term decarbonization goals. 3 years, it will not have an impact. It will basically just mean that we are ramping up, very likely, LNG purchases to make up for the Russian fuels. We just presented legislation a couple of months ago to fully phase out Russian fossils. So that, in a way, there is obviously a clear logic to this. Staying on the kind of safe energy security safety, we've been talking a lot about electrification. It means necessarily that systems will be more automized, they will be quite high-tech, and with that comes the risk that they could be vulnerable to cyber attacks, to espionage. How do you, from the Eurelectric point of view, how do you work to ensure that as we move more towards automized electrified systems, that these high-tech, super intelligent systems are actually not exposing us to completely new risks? We have. I mean, the Baltic Sea has been like a petri dish of all kinds of attacks in the past couple of years. So it's something that is actually happening, and there are forces testing our resilience. So from the point of electrification, what are your thoughts on this?
Maybe I can start. So I think before we get into the sort of nuts and bolts of security in electricity, I think it's important to underline the fact that we're moving towards electricity because the most immediate vulnerability for our energy system is actually our fossil fuel import dependency. This is what triggered the energy crisis 3 years ago, and this is what is, let's say, out of our hands. It's literally someone else who can turn off the tap. This is why moving to electricity in the first instance is so important. Then we also have to start looking at how do we now protect our systems, because indeed, as you say, there has been a significant increase in the cyber attacks and also the physical attacks on our infrastructure in recent years. And we need to essentially, as companies, move to the next level of how we do this. One thing, I mean, Markus is really the expert here because he's running a company that does it. But one thing that we've been focusing on in our research is, for instance, how to separate IT and OT so that the access to an IT system does not necessarily mean that you're then also in control of the physical assets immediately. So there needs to be an effort at all levels, and this is what I know you're working on, Markus.
Do you want to say?
Yeah, happy to comment on that. So there are 3 points for the resilience and preparedness. One is the situational awareness, understanding what's actually happening. Second point is contacts with authorities, and third point is rehearsing your resilience and preparedness. And on the point of the situational awareness, we are being continuously under cyber attacks, hybrid attacks, espionage, satellite disruptions, dubious activities. So we are dealing with that every day, us, Eurelectric member companies. Despite that, our asset availabilities are over 90%. So we can keep our assets running. Then the authority contacts are really important so that we get correct information of what is happening so that we can prepare correctly. From a Finnish perspective, from a Fortum perspective, we have been working with police, security police, the military for years and years.
Yeah.
That's been normal course of business. Now we also include NATO into that.
Yeah.
So just last week, a couple of last weeks, we have been practicing with NATO.
Yeah.
And this year we will have 20 exercises. So these are the points how you can prepare yourself, and it is just continuous observation and rehearsing.
That's very comforting to hear in this situation. We have used our 45 minutes highly effectively of solving all energy-related problems of Europe. I want to thank Markus and Christian for taking the time to be with us today, and I would like to wish everybody a lovely afternoon here in Turku and those following online. Thank you very much.
Thank you.